Welcome to the Three Sports Podcast. I am your host, Ben Axelrod. Joining me, as always, is waiting for next year's Craig Lindell. This is our kind of like our follow-up episode, I feel like. We had a very emotional podcast last week. That was I don't know if it was cathartic. I don't know really how to describe it, but just with all of the mess that went on during the Browns bye week, like I felt like that was like 7 weeks of frustration bottled into one podcast. I felt very, I guess, emotional following that podcast.
It felt like a really, like a culmination moment of a podcast. And I don't know if that one came across, but it did. It did feel cathartic because it was like the summation. I'd written articles. I'd done hashtags. It gave me a chance to really dive into the entire state of the Browns from the ownership all the way down. And now, we are a week later. Sashi Brown finally speaks, and it feels like we're just back to lawyer speak.
Yeah, and we are back to lawyer speak, and I kind of wanted to do some, let's call them Browns quick hits, because last week there was a massive discussion. There were discussions within the discussions. Last week's podcast, I think we went to an hour, and it could have been 2 hours. Like, it was literally, it just felt like a state of the Browns. This week there's not really that, but I just want to hit on some quick things. Like you said, Sashi Brown came out, gave his post-bye week address. It was his chance to finally offer his side of the story for the whole A.J. McCarron fiasco. We can dive into some of what he said. I do think there are bits and pieces that are interesting. But just kind of going back, I guess, to last week's podcast, like, we have to be the only fan base, and not just football, but all the NFL. That, like, I listen to Carmen and Lima pretty regularly, I'd say almost every day, and they've done a whole week of shows based on these press conferences. Like, we have to be the only fan base in all of sports that has press conferences like this that you could spend weeks discussing. Dissecting.
Yeah, it's exactly true. And I don't know if it says something about us or the team that we follow. I think it might be a little bit of both.
I think it's a blend.
Yeah, because we have, at Waiting for Next Year, we have a writer who came from St. Louis.
Yeah.
And it was his kind of remark that Cleveland fans are unnecessarily or unusually obsessed with ownership in ways that he doesn't feel like other cities are. And I think that might be hangover from Art Modell moving the team, where this town has a history, our DNA, our legacy is with ownership. And, the Cavaliers had to come up with new rules for the NBA about trading away picks.
I was playing NBA 2K, the video game, earlier this week, actually, and I was trying to manipulate some things, and you can turn off trade rules, turn on trade rules, because NBA trade rules are so complex. And they literally have a toggle button for the Stepien rule, and it says the Stepien rule. Like, there is a rule in the NBA about teams can't trade away picks in consecutive years because Ted Stepien ran the Cavs into the ground doing just that. It's amazing.
Right. No, and that's amazing. And I mean the way the Browns left and the way they came back with fewer draft picks than it sounds stupid to even say it anymore, but the Jaguars and the Panthers, and you're holding on to 17-year-old, 18-year-old grudges or whatever, but
yeah. That's interesting. I haven't really thought about that. I guess you could look, because even with the Indians, we do the whole Dolan's cheap thing. But I also think that's probably a conversation most baseball fan bases could have, other than, the Red Sox and Yankees and Dodgers. But, for some reason, we're the fan base always having that discussion. The Dan Gilbert thing, though, that's interesting, because Dan Gilbert's one of the more famous owners in all of sports because of the letter, because of LeBron James, because of his unique relationship with LeBron James, who's the most famous athlete in the planet. And then you're right, the Browns thing, to a degree, I think it ties to the Modell thing. But it's also, we've had really bad ownership with the Browns. And it's, we talk about, we haven't tried this, or we've tried this, we've tried that, and nothing's working. And at the end of the day, to go to hashtag sell the Browns, it all goes back to ownership. So I do think Cleveland fans are uniquely wired to have these conversations, but I also think, you can't account for Dan Gilbert being Dan Gilbert. You can't account for Jimmy Haslam being indicted. I mean, Jimmy Haslam's a very public figure because of his own missteps.
Well, and none of us knew who Jimmy Haslam was.
No.
At all. Like, I didn't know who his brother was. I didn't know who he was. He bought the Browns, and it was trial by fire, learning who all these people were.
Right.
And you know, we were willing to whitewash the fact that he'd been a minority owner of the Steelers. We were willing to whitewash this, that, the other thing. And turns out, you know, the man who got off to such a great start by sitting in the dog pound and everything else. Could you imagine him sitting in the dog pound today?
No. I actually because there were those clips that came out of him in London bartending with D. Haslam at like, I'm guessing a Browns backers bar or a bar populated.
Well, that's a job he's qualified for.
But I'm wondering how, like, if fans are like, oh, this is cool, Jimmy Haslam's pouring me beer, or if they're biting their tongue, or if they're actually saying stuff like that's just in theory, he's a very unpopular owner.
Was he charging $11.50 for the beer?
Probably. No, he was offering rebates that you could redeem at a later time.
The jokes just write themselves. We're not, like, I don't consider myself a joke writer, and I don't think anybody else does either. But they're so easy. They're so tip of the tongue, and that speaks to him as an owner.
Right. No, you're right. They're very lazy jokes that somehow are very easy to come up with, especially on Twitter, where we now have 280 characters to do so. Let's hit on the press conference real quick.
Okay.
I saw you. I was kind of tweeting along with it. I was actually off on Monday. You were tweeting along with it. I saw, so I'm guessing you were following it.
Yep.
I mean, it was. I'll give Sashi Brown this. He gives a better press conference than Ray Farmer. He gives a lot less sweaty of a press conference than Ray Farmer. I remember that Ray Farmer press conference in 2015 was just a complete disaster. At that point, they might as well have just fired everybody because you had no faith in any of his answers or any of that. I mean, Sashi still gave some bad answers, like saying Kenny Britt is off to. I had to think, am I talking about Dwayne Bowe or am I talking about Kenny Britt? Saying Kenny Britt is off to a slow start 8 games through the season is like the understatement of the century. But, I'm not confident in this plan. I don't think many people are. But the people who are confident in this plan, that press conference, I think, kind of told you everything you wanted to hear. I don't necessarily like, branding 2018 as the Browns' biggest offseason ever, which kind of seemed to be the underlying message Sashi Brown was trying to get across. But
it does feel like there's some truth to that, because it is a culmination of they do have all the picks,
but they had all the picks this year.
Kind of.
They had all the pick. They had the 1 pick and the 12th pick. They had, they could have sat there and taken Myles Garrett and Deshaun Watson, and that would have been. They could have traded up and taken Myles Garrett and Mitch Trubisky conceivably. Like, they've had assets, they've had picks, they've had cap space. Like, I don't see what would be different about next offseason. And if anything, this offseason they had the assets in 2017 and the assets in 2018 to deal with. Well,
because I think 3 is kind of a magical number if you look at like draft grades and draft gurus. Anybody, the back of the envelope math is that it's the 3rd year where you find out what your draft class is, and so this will be the 3rd regular season for their first draft class. It'll be the 4th regular season for a couple of those picks that they inherited, and I think that if you're looking at the timing of a rebuild, like, this is one of those culmination years. Now, whether Sashi Brown is the one who gets to enact that culmination year, like, I've struggled a little bit with this because I don't have a lot of confidence in the planners themselves, and I think they've made a lot of mistakes that have cost us a lot of pain, specifically in this current season, the 2nd year of their rebuild. But I do understand the tear it down to its guts and starting over completely and not hedging. So many Browns reboots have been hedges. When Mangini brings in half the Jets and veterans at that, it's like he was hedging against a full scale rebuild, probably because Randy Lerner didn't have the stomach for it. I just think that even in the realm of the full scale rebuild down to the studs, that they've failed.
I think
in a lot of ways.
I agree with that, and I guess my counter to that would be not doing, not the fringe moves we've talked about, not re-signing Mitchell Schwartz, not bringing back Tashawn Gibson, not keeping Joe Hayden. Like, that's resulted now in a 1-23 record that has, one, your head coach making decisions like yanking Deshaun Kaiser in and out of the lineup because he's so desperate to get a win and to not have this awful record continue to tarnish his own resume. And two, I mean, the attempted trade for A.J. McCarron then would be a hedge, right? I mean, that would be completely counterintuitive to what they're doing.
It makes no sense.
Yeah, it doesn't add up to the overall quote-unquote plan.
Which is why some are
right,
considering
which is why
Sashi Brown a hero for not getting that trade accomplished.
Only in Cleveland can we use words like hero when it comes to saving a second and third round pick.
Well, and that's exactly, and it's a weird time, man. You got the Peyton Manning rumors, and so it's just another. Everybody's looking for a savior,
right?
And I don't think there is one. And to that point, as little confidence as I have in Sashi Brown. Like, I don't think he is the devil who's ruining everything.
No, I think
it's a team effort that they're stinking up the joint.
Right. That's what, when I get into these arguments on Twitter and people are saying, how could you defend Hugh? My point is always, I'm not defending Hugh. They're 1-23. They can both be bad. If you're 1-23, it's all bad. Everything's bad.
But my point with Hugh has always been like he could have done the best coaching job in the history of coaching and still only have 2 wins.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's we're talking about. We're talking about splitting hairs between 1 win and 5 wins over a 2-year. There's not enough talent on this roster to even sniff a winning record.
Talent or experience. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I agree with you. Like, Sashi Brown, I think, is executing the plan that he set out to execute, him and Paul DePodesta and Andrew Berry. There have been misfires, which he owned up to on Carson Wentz and Deshaun Watson, although, that I guess that was one frustrating thing for me from the press conference was you can say, whoops, my bad, on Carson Wentz, but then when it comes to Deshaun Watson, like, that doesn't fly. Like, it's year 2. How many misevaluations of quarterbacks are we going to, allow?
Well, and that's one thing for sure is whenever you go through a rebuild and you punt the quarterback decision down the road, and yes, they drafted Kessler and Kaiser in back-to-back years, but when you're sitting where they're sitting and you push that quarterback decision or that all-in quarterback attempt down the road, you're just prolonging. It's like you haven't really started the clock yet.
Yeah, no, it's funny because that's, people will defend this regime and say, well, this is the one thing we haven't tried. We haven't tried continuity. I'd argue the one thing, we haven't tried is going after a franchise quarterback and building around that franchise quarterback. Yeah. I don't think. I mean, they haven't done it since Tim Couch.
No.
But I guess to the larger point, they are executing their plan. Now, I think, it's kind of inarguable. Whoever's running this draft next year, whoever's running this offseason, is in a very good spot. They do have some core pieces, Myles Garrett, an offensive line, some other defensive pieces you could quote-unquote build around. They obviously have, they own half the second round of the draft.
So I got to ask you this, by the way, before you finish that thought.
Yes.
While we're talking about the week that the Browns had in the press conference, how weird, and I'm fine with it, I'm happy that they did it, but how weird was the timing and decision of giving Joe Thomas extra money for nothing?
Yeah, I don't...
Like, were there conversations going, we've talked about this, we could really use some good news, let's put this out and pay Joe Thomas?
I tend to think it was a publicity stunt.
Is it that simple?
I tend to think so. I mean, I believe them when they say we had been having these discussions because they probably foresaw needing a publicity stunt, and maybe the injury complicated that. Yeah. It does nothing as far as
they foresaw needing a publicity stunt.
It's true. They probably said, "Hey, we're going to need some good PR around November." Then Joe Thomas tears his arm apart, and they wind up going through with it.
I really thought we could get to Halloween, but as it turns out.
We thought it might be a Christmas bonus, but looks like it's going to be a Halloween bonus.
Cleveland Browns are the real war on Christmas.
Yeah. Oh my God, you're telling me. But just because they are executing the plan that they have in place, I agree with you. I'm not sure they should be the ones to complete it. And they're in a situation now where if you bring in a new regime, we're already hearing Peyton Manning and Carmen and Lima spent all morning today talking about Andrew Luck and potentially Jim Harbaugh. Like, somebody could come in and take over for this and maintain that quote-unquote continuity. I mean, it wouldn't be the same people, but you would be starting from the same build. This is a young enough roster where I don't think anybody's going to come in and start trading away pieces.
No, I agree with that. And anybody who is going to do a really good job picking up this ball and running with it, if that's going to happen, is going to make the most of these assets. They're not going to. We've seen it too many times, whether it was Mitchell Schwartz or even back to Jabal Sheard.
Yeah.
Like, we don't do the 4-3, we do the 3-4 now.
Right. That's stupid.
Like, he ends up signing with the Belichick and the Patriots, who are, Belichick's like DNA is in the 3-4, quote unquote.
Right.
Like, you need players,
right,
and you cannot waste players and just let them leave.
Oh my God!
Especially second round picks.
I heard so many conversations about Joey Bosa and how he wouldn't fit in the Brown scheme, and he winds up going to the Chargers, who ran the exact same scheme, and now he's on a historic pace for. He's basically the Carson Wentz of defensive ends at this point.
Well, and because the Browns drafted Trent Richardson once upon a time, there's no way they could ever draft Ezekiel Elliott,
right? Or Saquon Barkley,
Yeah, exactly. Like, there are no rules. There are individual players,
right?
And I could even argue that Trent Richardson was not a horrible draft pick.
I'll defend the Trent Richardson pick. That's my hill to die on.
And I don't know exactly. And I don't know what happened, in terms of different teams have different people who work in personnel who help these guys make the adjustment. Maybe nobody could have helped Trent Richardson make the adjustment, but I argue none of it had to do with his ability or talent or physical gifts coming into the NFL from the draft. But
no.
I don't want to get down the Trent Richardson rabbit
hole. I'll say this about Trent Richardson. They targeted a guy. It was a guy who scored touchdowns on a roster that needed a guy who scored touchdowns. I think they traded up, gave up probably a third-round pick or something to trade up. They got him, and for at least one season, he scored touchdowns. He did what they paid him to do, and then they traded him off for a first-round pick that became Johnny Manziel. So I'll defend that pick until my dying day.
Well, Willis McGahee carried the ball for the rest of the season.
I was reminded the other day that Willis McGahee was the running back, we'll get to this in a second, on the Josh Gordon team. I call the 2013 Browns just the Josh Gordon team because that's all they were.
Josh Gordon's back.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. But just one last thing on the press conference. One, I thought it was really funny the way Sashi managed to contradict himself about 27 times while explaining the A.J. McCarron fiasco. But I'm not going to kill him for that. But I thought what was interesting was later in the day, Hugh Jackson gives his press conference, and he basically says, I know Sashi talked to you guys earlier, and I'm not going to talk about any of that. I don't think it's very tough to read between the lines. I think the reports of a rift are real. I think Hugh Jackson has made it clear that there's a rift. I think if you look at where the leaks in the media are coming from, it's clear that Hugh Jackson is kind of manning his battle station, which is why I tend to believe, and all indications are based on the A.J. McCarron trade, that Jimmy Haslam is going to ultimately side with Hugh Jackson. I tend to think that scenario that we just laid out, where somebody comes in and takes over for this regime and kind of reboots it, from with a reboot within the reboot, I tend to think that's what's going to happen because I think Hugh Jackson has pretty clearly manned his battle station.
I think so too, but again, this is where I start to blame ownership. If you and I can see it and we know exactly what's going on, there was a report of a conference call 3 or 4 weeks ago, whatever else, to try and get these guys back on the same page. This is where leadership comes in. And I'm not saying like I could walk in and do it, but just because I can't walk in and do it doesn't mean that I shouldn't demand that of the billionaire owner of the team and his wife and whoever else is involved. Like, they know the problem. Mm-hmm. It's smacking them in the face, and we're basically all biding our time until it comes to a head at the end of the season.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to fix it and trying to salvage it.
Well, and it's the second straight regime this has happened. This happens within teams all the time. I think there are divides in coaching staffs and front offices throughout the league. It's just, how does it keep happening to the Browns? Like, how does this mistake keep happening? And, I think probably what happened is Hugh Jackson came to Cleveland, was promised certain influence over the roster. Either
feels like he's not getting it.
Feels like he's not getting it, or isn't getting it to the degree he was promised. And I think it probably goes back to the Browns getting passed up for Jared Goff in the 2016
draft. There's a huge difference
draft.
between theory and practice.
Yeah.
And so from an idea standpoint, it feels, at least based on what we've heard, it seems like Dee Haslam was really influential in convincing Hugh Jackson to take the job. And so now that he's losing like this, I'm sure he's feeling pretty defensive.
Well, and I mean, think about this. I think we talked about it in one of our first podcasts. We were all excited for Hugh Jackson because this was a guy other teams wanted.
Yep.
So why do you think he picked the Cleveland Browns? I'm guessing, just reckless speculation, I'm guessing they gave him some sort of roster control that he couldn't get elsewhere. And whether you a lot of fans will hear that and say, well, I don't like he's the guy who wanted RG3. Seemingly he would be the guy who wanted Deshaun Kaiser.
And the front office defenders on Twitter will also say, well, he wanted Demario Davis and Joe Hayden, and those guys aren't a part of the future. Why would you want those guys? And the answer is you would want those guys because your head coach wants those guys, and they're not hurting you. That's the answer. By the way, I get all upset again.
No, I know. Jason Lockenfora sent out some snarky tweet last week before the Jets-Bills game on Thursday night where he was basically lambasting the Browns for giving up Demario Davis for nothing, and fans, for some reason, started to do a victory lap on Demario Davis in a trade that got you I didn't get
Calvin Pryor,
who got in a fight with Ricardo Lewis and got cut before the first game. I didn't understand it, but I'm not surprised. We're starting to get a little worked up, but this feels much calmer than last week. I don't know if this is a positive, but let's just let's touch on this real quick. Josh Gordon is back. He's going to play for the Browns, I think. The Browns are still kind of hedging what they're saying, but
was it GQ or Esquire?
GQ. But he's on the Browns roster, and the Browns have had every opportunity in the world to either cut him or trade him. If he doesn't play for the Browns once he's eligible to play, which I believe is December 2nd, it's in a couple.
I think so.
They play the Chargers, I think. And
it might be the last game in November.
Yeah, maybe. I think it's when they play.
It's weird. There was a day he could come back, and then 2 weeks later he was allowed to physically start practicing.
Right.
And then maybe another 2 weeks he was allowed to play in his first game.
Yeah.
So we're not just dumb. There are weird steps
I think
along
you're right.
the way.
I think he comes back to practice late November, but the first game is December 2nd against the Chargers. Either way, it seems like he's going to play for the Browns.
I think you're right.
Because if he doesn't, he has I'd say he has a pretty big grievance he could file.
And the trade deadline's gone.
The trade deadline's gone. If the Browns were going to cut him, I don't know why they wouldn't do it already.
They've got nothing left to do but either play him or cut him.
Right. Which is bizarre because he's wanted out of Cleveland seemingly forever. The Browns have distanced themselves from him, rightfully so to a degree. This is a guy who couldn't even be in the building, let alone practicing and playing. But it seems like he is going to play in some capacity for the Browns. I don't know how many games it will be for. What do you think of it? I think it's interesting.
I think it's interesting. I think that our friend Zach Jackson, when he asked the question, how many times are you going to let Josh Gordon embarrass you, is one that really sticks in my mind. Because even when I was reading the GQ Q&A,
right,
I'm going, okay, this is the guy who's lied countless times over countless numbers of chances.
Right.
And now you'd like to believe that he's telling the truth, but even, and I don't mean to be a jerk, but even that Q&A felt like some of the answers were trumped up and a little bit braggy in a weird way. And so I'm hoping that he's turned the corner, but I think I'd be a stupid person to trust him without just demanding that he show it continually until such time as I don't feel that way anymore. It's not on me to prove it. It's on him to prove it. Not that he owes me anything, but you know what I mean. Right.
And that's that's Zach Jackson and Andre Knott, our friends at the A to Z podcast. They've been very anti bringing back Josh Gordon. They don't like what it represents. And they've been on this for 2 years now, I think, dating
At
back
least.
to the 2014 or 2015 season. And Zach told that story where he was speaking, I think, at St. Vincent St. Mary, and a kid asked, what do you think they're going to do with Josh Gordon? And Zach said exactly that. How many times are you going to let Josh Gordon embarrass you? And I tend to respond the way the kid responded, which is, how about one more? Because at this point, what's the harm in it? If Josh Gordon comes in and flames out and does everything we've known Josh Gordon to do, it's just another part of this disaster that's been the 2017 season.
Well, and at this point, I don't think anybody would even really blame the Browns.
Yeah.
The trade deadline's passed. All that they could do is cut him. But if there's any hope at all for Deshaun Kaiser to show something or be able to throw over the top of a defense, I'd rather have him doing it with Josh Gordon going up to try and get the ball than anybody else on this team.
And I guess the argument against it would be that you don't want this negative presence or potentially negative presence, a guy who we've seen throughout his career prove to be a negative presence, infecting a young locker room, which I understand.
But there's also a way that he could change the entire story around for this team, not by himself, but if Myles Garrett is healthy in the second half, if Corey Coleman is healthy in the second half, he just got back to practice, if Josh Gordon can do anything to help this offense and be somebody that makes defensive coordinators sweat, and the Browns win 2 games, all of a sudden, they might be able to achieve continuity.
Yeah, and I'm not even optimistic that will happen. But I agree at this point.
Oh, there's like a 12% chance
right.
it happens.
What's the harm in trying to do it? 2, I don't think the face of this franchise is here yet. It's whoever, going back to the Sashi Brown press conference, he seemed everything they've done, including that Sashi Brown press conference, has indicated that they're going to go after a free agent. And I used to think that was Jimmy Garoppolo. Now all signs point to it being Kirk Cousins, which might cost them all that cap space that they've been saving up. But I don't think the face of the franchise is here yet. I don't worry about Josh Gordon around a guy like Myles Garrett.
But it better be Kirk Cousins. If that guy does not reveal himself obviously at the top of the draft and we get in another Myles Garrett situation, they better have that guy in hand in addition to using those picks on whatever. And you and I talked about it. This needs to be one of those years where they bring back Deshaun Kaiser, they bring in the high-priced free agent, and they go and they draft they draft the 2018 version of Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins was the extra guy in the 3rd round when they drafted RG3.
No, if they're going to achieve continuity and bring everybody back, I mean, they're again, going back to the press conference, they very clearly seem all in on the Seattle Seahawks approach, which is take as many shots through as many channels and hope you land a Russell Wilson. So, that's what they're going to have to do, especially with the quarterback room looking like what it looks like right now. Anything else on the Browns? Has your opinion? Have you calmed down with the sell the Browns, or how has that taken off in the last week?
Oh, it's not something that I'm just going to hit now forever and ever and ever. It'll come up intermittently.
Yeah.
And we'll see what they do on the actual field. But until it's very much like what I said about Josh Gordon. Until proven otherwise, they're bad owners. Until proven otherwise, they're incapable of leading this team organizationally and having all these people answer to them. So it's not my fault. I hope they turn it around. I hope they prove me wrong. But it's not up to me to give them the benefit of the doubt because they've not earned it.
Yeah, no.
So that's it.
Yeah, no.
But no, I can't scream sell the Browns every week.
You're not going to be protesting outside First Energy.
Well, first of all, it's not entertaining for me to be a one-note person. It's not entertaining for anyone to listen to that either.
No, I agree. Let's touch on the Cavs real quick because we were kind of talking, of course, Browns bye week somehow managed to fill up this podcast. But
I know, right?
Let's hit on the Cavs. I think I asked you a couple of episodes how you're processing this season or how you're planning on processing this season. I'm
still in chill mode.
You're still in chill mode. I am too, but it's kind of a cautious chill mode. And it's not. I'm not worried about the team and how they stack up against Boston or how they stack up against Milwaukee. I'm getting a little concerned about LeBron's free agency right now. And
why?
Because I don't know why he would come back.
But what's getting nervous about it going to help? I mean, the idea is that I think you're right.
Yeah,
I think you're right. But the idea is they've got the Brooklyn pick, and if they have a chance to use it, that's the only way they're going to bolster the chance that he comes back. If they don't use it, then they're not going to be able to bolster the chance that he comes back, and he very well could leave. But so much of it is LeBron is the market maker.
Yes.
He makes his own luck. He makes everything happen. And so it's not so much about the Cavs positioning. You can talk about how well the Cavs positioned before he became a free agent in Miami and gave him the opportunity to come back. But it was dumb luck. It was dumb luck. They still had Dion Waiters. They had Kyrie Irving.
Yeah.
But it was just dumb luck. And so it was dumb. It was the same dumb luck that caused them to get the number 1 pick the first time. You know, it was just the second side of the same coin.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of just been a confluence of things. I think I'm using that word correctly. Maverick Carter gave an interview to Rich Eisen a week ago, where Rich Eisen was kind of pushing him on the LA thing, and Maverick Carter, in theory, this answer should make you feel better, where he said, look, LA is not that big of a draw because of movies. LeBron can only shoot movies in the offseason anyways, and he lives here in the offseason already. If he plays in LA, he might sell a few more shoes, but it's really not that big of a deal.
He's got the number 1 shoe in the world practically anyway.
What matters is winning. And that's actually Giannis Antetokounmpo just signed a deal with Nike, and a big shoe deal with Nike. And it's interesting to see where Nike's big stars are. They're in Cleveland, they're in Milwaukee, they're in Oklahoma City, right? Like it's market really doesn't matter, which is something we've learned now for a long time. But he said,
unfortunately for the Knicks,
he said though the one thing that does matter is winning, and I think when you factor that in and you look at this Cavs roster, and then you factor in what Kyrie's doing in Boston and the fact that Kyrie would have been that guy who I think could have enticed LeBron to stay because he could continue to grow and play with this 25-year-old emerging superstar, it's left me, I guess, very pessimistic when it comes to forecasting LeBron's free agency.
No, I'm with you, especially, and not even just Kyrie, Jaylen Brown and
Jason Tatum.
The way those two guys are playing alongside Kyrie,
right.
Nobody is better positioned to for the next 5 to 10 years than they are.
And I think had they kept David Griffin, I think some of the conversations everybody's had about David Griffin have been kind of overblown. But he's a guy who has stood up to LeBron before. And it's funny you mentioned Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, because I think if you had a strong leader in this front office, that person could stand up to LeBron and say, look, we need to stop trading away these picks for to get the Channing Frys and to even, the Kevin Loves. It will be nice to bring in a high-profile rookie for you to grow alongside, and that could potentially prolong your career here for 5 years. I think David Griffin could do that. I don't think Kobe Altman could do that. I don't think there's a lot of leadership in this Cavs front office right now.
No, I'm with you on that.
And
the only place, and I'm with you 100%. You're right. The winning thing. But there's two different kinds of winning.
Yeah.
There's winning on the court, and LeBron is always going to have to be in a competitive environment where he's winning like that, and to a certain level. But there's also winning in terms of legacy, and I don't know if he can stare down the letter he wrote when he came back and leave again. Like, I don't know if there's any better story than him staying, and I'm not counting on it.
Right.
I've got the same inklings that you do. But I always end up arriving at this idea that I have no idea what LeBron's going to do.
Yeah.
And I just don't. I'm predicting him has been so fruitless.
I don't think he knows what to do, what he's going to do. I truly believe he does not know. But if you just forecasting ahead to next summer, there's just not a lot that I think would entice him to stay. And I agree. The letter and the legacy, all that, I think it matters. But I also think to go back, to bring this full circle, there's definitely a way to paint Dan Gilbert as the bad guy in all of this. And at least on a national level, there won't be any semblance of the blowback he received for the decision. I think, especially winning the title here, that's the biggest part of that. Let's talk about the Arthur meme. real quick, because I was telling you before we started recording this, I actually processed that in real time. I was watching. I got NBA League Pass this year.
So for anybody listening who doesn't know, that was LeBron posted an Instagram post at like 10 o'clock at night of Arthur's fist.
Right after Kyrie torched the Hawks, which I watched in real time. He posted an Instagram that said mood, and it was the Arthur meme from like 2 years ago. Yeah. And it's of Arthur shaking his fist in anger. And of course, when asked about it, LeBron passive-aggressively said there was no significance behind it. He just likes Arthur. I don't know what it was in relation to. There, off the top of my head, I could come up with 3 theories.
Yeah.
There are plenty of rabbit holes to go down. Between Kyrie, between Eric Bledsoe, between some Instagram model claiming LeBron DM'd her and it kind of going national. I don't know what it was about, but I will say this. I defend LeBron probably more than anybody on Twitter not named Nick Wright. The passive-aggressiveness and the pettiness, I don't want to say I'm tired of it, because I think that kind of implies that I'm ready to move on from it when I'm the furthest thing from that. But I guess I just don't understand, like Steph Curry is going to be a Golden State Warrior for the rest of his career. There was no drama surrounding his free agency. Russell Westbrook re-upped with Oklahoma City in kind of a uncertain situation where the 2 big moves they made, acquiring Carmelo and Paul George, those guys are free agents next year.
Right.
I guess there's a part of me that just, I'm trying to phrase this correctly, I just don't understand why LeBron is the way LeBron is sometimes. He's the most famous athlete in the world. He's been a cultural phenomenon for close to 20 years now. But there's just always a story with him. And maybe it's intentional. It probably is intentional. But I don't understand why it has to be that way.
No, it's true. It's true. And it's one of the more frustrating things. And even as we get used to it and it continually happens, it's still just the fact that we're talking about it, and I don't think it's dumb that we're talking about it. It's like there's something to that.
Yeah.
But it does drive me crazy because that's my least favorite part of following the NBA is where it veers into reality TV. Like it might as well be the Real Housewives of blah blah blah.
Oh, that is the NBA now. That is like
drives me nuts though.
That's
I don't like it.
That's like what it's built on at this point. I did think it was interesting, though, because I followed LeBron. I followed his career still while he was in Miami very closely.
I did not, by
Yeah,
the way.
well, I think a lot, it's kind of 50-50. I think a lot of fans still did. The NBA's always been my favorite league. I mean, I was rooting against the Heat pretty passionately. Those were actually some really fun playoffs. But
I even wrote about how I thought it was pointless for Z to go to Miami for the 1 year. I thought it was really dumb.
Yeah, that was weird.
But anyway, go ahead.
Anyways, I when LeBron came back, I kind of had this inkling, because I knew what was coming. LeBron came back a completely different star in a completely different stratosphere, not only from the titles, but that team was so high profile. The decision was so high profile. He was not the same star he was when he left Cleveland the first time as when he came back. And I had an inkling that a large portion of the Cleveland fan base might not initially be equipped to handle it, which I think we saw, through that, with all the David Blatt stuff and all of that stuff. But I think you're right. I think we're now accustomed to it. I will just say this real quick, and then we can get out of here. As pessimistic as I am about LeBron returning, if anything, it has increased my attention toward the regular season, especially for games like last night when he played Milwaukee and played Giannis, who is just incredible. And watching him, I would imagine
they made a really big deal of Giannis blocking LeBron, didn't they?
They did. I saw that. I was a little surprised by that because I thought Giannis's performance stood out on its own without the block. He had 40 points on 16 for 21 shooting. I would imagine watching him is how other fan bases process watching LeBron, where you're half in awe and half helpless. You're just my team can't do anything to stop this guy,
right.
And it's so amazing. I was thinking about that if you were a fan of the Wizards at that game on Friday night when LeBron scored 57. Another game where it's just don't take these games for granted, because if LeBron leaves or if he stays, nothing like this is ever coming through Cleveland sports ever again.
No, never. And And that's what I said to you probably 3 or 4 weeks
Yeah.
ago when we talked about it too, is like, I'm just going to try and enjoy every minute of it, because I know, again, back to our friends, it's Halley's Comet.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen all the time. It's only happened once in my entire lifetime.
Yeah.
The closest thing that I can come to having a sports hero this big was like maybe Manny Ramirez, Albert Bell, and Bernie Kosar. Like,
Right.
that's it.
Yeah.
So, and those guys are 30% of what LeBron is to the universe.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So, if the best I can hope for in any regular season is 30% of what LeBron's given us in terms of the size of star
Right.
he is and the quality of performance he's given us, then it would be beneath me to not just appreciate it.
I do think there is one silver lining in kind of this slow start that they've gotten off to, and it's that we've stopped comparing everything they do to the Warriors, because right now that feels like such an unfathomable task to beat the Warriors, and that because we've done that now for really 3 seasons. I mean, it was pretty. You could see pretty early in 2015 what the Warriors were. It's not a fun way to process the NBA, even as much as it meant to the 2016 title overcoming that team. It's not a fun way to process your team only comparing them to one team. And I don't think we're going to be doing that until June.
No, but I do have to, in that same vein, I have to ask you a question.
Yes.
How has your opinion and your feeling developed over Kyrie as we've now watched him, and he seems to be doing really, really well and fitting in and playing defense and have you gotten more bitter?
No, I actually, to a degree, like when I watch him play, I am rooting for the other team. Like I was watching, so I can't, but that's something I cannot control. Like, right? Like you feel how you feel. I watched him play Oklahoma City on Friday night. It was the national TV game.
You were the biggest Russ fan in the world.
Oh, my God. I was like, the Cavs should have traded for Carmelo. And then they blow the lead, and Kyrie does what he does. I turned on that Hawks game hoping that somehow the Hawks would beat him. But I'm trying not to be bitter about it. And you're right. It is frustrating because he would have meant so much to LeBron staying and really just to the Cavs. Even if LeBron left, you still have Kyrie, who's this emerging superstar. I'm really trying not to be bitter about it, though, because I learned with LeBron, one, that's really not a fun way to process sports, especially when the guy's doing well.
Yep.
And two, I got to the point with LeBron toward the end of that 4th season, although I started rooting against the Heat just because I thought it increased the Cavs' chances of landing him, which wound up happening. I learned to just appreciate that he is this NBA superstar. He's going to be a Hall of Famer, and a big portion of his career is going to be remembered for what he did in Cleveland. I think at the end of the day, that's cool. So Kyrie, it's going to be funny because Kyrie, even though probably the biggest moment of his career will have happened in Cleveland, even though he spent, I think, the first 6 seasons of his career in Cleveland, that's just going to be a small fraction of probably the rest of his career. I mean, he'll probably have a 20-year career, and
it depends on what he does. He may never hit a game-winning shot in a championship.
He probably
season.
won't. He probably won't. But I mean, I think there's something cool that Kyrie Irving spent 6 years of his career in Cleveland, and I'm trying to appreciate it through that lens. But yeah, when I watch him play, I'm rooting for the other team. I don't know what to tell you. So yeah, maybe I'm trying not to be bitter about it. But at the end of the day, you feel how you feel.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. That's going to do it for today's 3 Sports Podcast. He's Craig Lindell from Waiting for Next Year. I'm Ben Axelrod from WKYC. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe on iTunes, leave a rating, leave a review, tell a friend. We'll be back with you next week breaking down all the latest in Cleveland sports. Thanks for listening, guys.